Okay, welcome to another video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the purchase agreement. We're going to go through this thing line by line as quickly as possible. So sit back, put your seatbelts on, and let's learn everything you need to know about getting a purchase agreement filled out. Okay, so for starters, most important thing obviously is the date. Everything starts with a date. We've got in the next field here, line 3, we have the buyer's information. This is where we're going to put Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, or however that's going to look, but you can put multiple buyers in the same position. Line 5, we're going to go into earnest money. Earnest money is an amount of money that the buyer would offer to the seller to sort of as a deposit towards the purchase. Those funds will show back up at closing. They will remain a buyer credit as long as you follow all the rules in the purchase agreement and show up to closing. Okay. So once an offer is accepted, I have to turn in the earnest money within 2 business days of accepting that offer. We can make some minor changes to it here. There's some fields here on line 7 where we can add a date or change a little bit of time. But for the most part, we need to get that earnest money turned in with about 2 days. Line 11 goes into the description of the property, address, city, state, zip. This is a really long paragraph here. I am not going to go into this entire, just basically describes what everything included in that property means. Okay, so the next line here, probably after the date, the next most important line is going to be line 38. Seller has agreed to sell the property to the buyer for the sum of X number of dollars. This will be the purchase price. Line 41, percentage of sale price in cash. So this is going to be the down payment. Line 2 is going to be the amount that is going to be financed through the mortgage. So if you're going to do a 20% down, 80% financing, line 2 would be 80%. Line 3 is the percent of the sale price, assuming seller's current mortgage. I've never used this field in 15 years of practicing real estate, but it's really nice to have there because you never know when you may be able to assume a mortgage. And then line 4, it would be percent of the sale price by contract for deed. Now, if you're going to purchase a property, contract for deed, and you're going to finance a certain amount of that money, line 1 would be whatever you're going to put down, and line 4 would be the amount that you're going to be financing. All right, so the date of closing. This is going to be the date that both parties are going to meet, and one side is going to bring money, and another side is going to leave with money. You'll notice here on the top of most of the pages, it will have that address in there. This is just important to make sure that the pages don't get switched out and that everything gets matched up. Okay, so line 51, we're taking a look here at mortgage financing. Let's just say 98% of purchases out there today are going to have a mortgage attached to it. So you're going to want to include a mortgage financing provision. If you go to line 52, this purchase agreement is subject to the financing provisions below. We are going to take line 56 here. This is going to be what type of mortgage? Is it a first mortgage only, or is it a first mortgage and a subordinate financing? Most mortgages are just going to be a first. Some are going to have that a first and a second in there. Is it conventional or privately insured, Department of Veterans Affairs, FHA, USDA, or other? Now, when we get into these next couple of lines, this is going to be all of the variation that's going to take place with the mortgage, right? So early on in this thing, you can say, hey, we will purchase the property as long as the period is not greater than, in this box, we normally put 30 years and no more than market. So if all of a sudden the interest rate goes to 10% and you have market in there and that's the market rate, you may have to close on that. So just something to keep in mind there. The mortgage application is to be made within 5 business days after the final acceptance date. Buyer agrees to use best efforts to secure a commitment for such financing and to execute all documents required to consummate said financing. This is another one where basically, let's say you don't close, you don't get the mortgage, and you did not consummate said financing. You didn't provide the documents required. You could lose your earnest money in that situation. Obviously, if you're going through this effort, you want to put in all the best effort forward on this. All right, line 68, mortgage financing contingency. This purchase agreement is contingent upon the following and applies to the first mortgage and any subordinate financing. Line 70, if buyer cannot secure the financing specified in this purchase agreement and this purchase agreement does not close on the closing date specified, this purchase agreement is canceled. Buyer and seller shall immediately sign a cancellation of purchase agreement to confirming said cancellation and directing all earnest money be paid here to be refunded to buyer or forfeited to seller. This is probably the best case scenario for the buyer. If it's not super competitive, this is what I'm checking. I'm doing line 70 and then refunded to the buyer. If it's maybe a little bit more, competition, you could maybe do forfeited to seller. You could do a portion of it forfeited to seller. The next option here, line 77, it's option A or option B in this situation. Option B means that you will provide to the seller a written statement on or before a certain date. Obviously, before you close, you want to provide that written statement. This is a little bit more of a hoop for a buyer. Adds in some additional steps in there, but it really helps them keep in compliance. And also, if for some reason this buyer in option 70 here doesn't get the mortgage, you may not really find out until you get really close to closing, where with the written statement, you're going to have a really good idea of what's coming based on the fact that you do or do not have that written statement. There's some more options here. Line 108, refunded, retained, refunded, retained. Typically, I'm putting refunded to buyer. Some sellers are asking that buyers put retained by seller in there. I don't do that unless my buyer wants me to. Generally, I don't like that situation. So locking of mortgage interest rate, line 113. So once you get the offer accepted, you can either have 5 business days of acceptance or at any time prior to closing as required by a lender. And this is just about locking your rate. Let's say, so lender commitment to work orders. Let's say that your appraisal comes out and you need a handrail replaced. This would be a place where you could include those funds in there. If it's an FHA, maybe there's some exterior paint that needs to be updated and you can see that, and you talk with the selling agent or the seller and say, hey, there's some there's some paint that's peeling. FHA is going to require that. I'm going to put $1,500 in required repairs, and if the lender wants that fixed, then you'll cover up to that amount and then we'll cover the balance. After the completion of some of these items, some appraisals are going to require the appraiser to go back out there and do a reinspection. Some will take just a photograph. If there is a reinspection, if there's a fee, we're going to designate who is going to pay for that. On line 127, the FHA clause, what that is about, that basically means if for some reason a property doesn't appraise to the purchase price, you will not be bound to that number. You'll be able to renegotiate. Next, we go into lender processing fees. FHA and DVA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, have funding fees. And these fees can be paid at closing. They can be paid by seller. They can be paid, and they can also be rolled into the cost of the mortgage. So when we get into the DVA funding fee here, you can look pursuant to federal DVA funding fee. And line 147, we're going into the same thing here again, where basically if the property does not meet the appraised value, doesn't match the purchase price, you can renegotiate and there's no penalty to you. All right, so line 157, we're looking at seller's contribution to closing costs. Closing costs above and beyond the purchase price of the home. So for instance, if you're buying a $300,000 home, the closing costs for the mortgage and title insurance and homeowner's policy and taxes and prepaids and insurance go on top of that amount. So that $300,000 purchase really quickly turns into $309,000. So in this case, what you can do is you can ask the seller to contribute to the buyer's closing costs, even in a flat dollar amount or a percentage. Moving down to line 168, we're looking at inspections here. Buyer has been made aware of the availability of property inspections. Buyer elects or declines to do an inspection. You can elect to do it and have it not be contingent. Typically, you would say that this is going to be contingent. Seller does not agree to allow intrusive testing or inspection, so you can't just like rip the walls off to try to figure out what's going on. And then for this right here, we go to line 184. This is where we're going to put in the date. So this is going to tell us how many days you have to get the inspection completed. The inspection starts, the clock for it starts the day after the offer was accepted. So if today was accepted, tomorrow will be day 1. Going into line 197, this is going to talk a little bit about how the buyer intends to purchase this property. Are they going to sell an additional property? Are they going to close on a property? Or can the buyer purchase it without the sale of another property? Real estate taxes and special assessments. This is where we take a look at what's going to happen according to the purchase agreement at closing. If there's some fees here, if there's some taxes, if there's some stuff laying there that we need to address. Typically, I'm coming in all these and I'm saying prorated to closing, prorated to closing. Seller shall pay on deferred. Seller shall pay on special assessments. Seller shall pay, seller shall pay. If for some reason there is a special assessment there and the seller is not going to pay, they're usually going to counter back and say, hey, we're not going to pay this, and you can get it sorted out from that. This is also stating that the seller has not received a notice, so they can't misrepresent that there is one there or that there is not, and the title company is going to be able to find out. Line 251, we're taking a look at what happens if the seller had already accepted an offer from another buyer that planned on canceling. Not ideal, but this is going to lay out what that expectation is going to look like and when that other offer is going to get canceled. Line 258 is addressing a type of title that we're going to be requesting from the seller. Is it a warranty deed, personal rep deed, contract fee deed, or trustee's deed? Each one has its own uses for the most part. Seller, we got possession. When you purchase a property, you can delay that possession if you want. You can hold it off for 3 days. You could potentially rent it back to them. Whatever that looks like, there's a lot of flexibility on making that work. So line 271 is just taking a look at what possession is going to look like and when that's going to take place. Going into just general overview stuff. If you really want to read this, go ahead. This is going to talk about on line 365 here is asking you, what type of disclosure did the seller do? Was it a property disclosure statement or was it a disclosure alternative? We're just clarifying on the purchase agreement the condition of the property and that information has been documented. I made another video going through the seller's disclosure. If you want, definitely check that out. It's probably one of our more exciting videos. So now we're taking a look, if we go to line 37, we're taking a look at, is this property connected to city water and city sewer? You know, if you're in Richfield, yes, yes. If you're in St. Cloud, you may not have city water or city sewer, but we're making some assumptions here. We're filling this out based on these being true. If they're not, then we're going to have to get that clarified. The next one is subsurface sewage system. Does it have one? Does it have a private well serving the property? You could be connected to city water and have a well and have a sewer. Just something to keep in mind. Line 391, home protection warranty. This is usually a use in negotiation. Some buyers will request this. Some sellers will include it. Basically determines that maybe a home warranty is going to be provided or maybe it is not, and then who is going to pay for it. These lines here, an agency notice. This is primarily geared towards if it is a dual agency, but this is just clarifying to all parties who the selling agent is and who the buyer's agent is. We're going into line 405, seller's contribution of buyer's broker compensation. This is where buyer's agents get paid. We put in here the compensation amount related to whatever our buyer broker agreement was. We put that amount in here and then we negotiate on that. This is a dual agency representation disclosure. If for some reason it is a dual agency, both brokers are the same, EXP, for example, we need the buyer and seller both to sign off on this. We've got a box here for other. Everybody's got their own other stuff that they like to include in these. For my part, I like to include a little bit of a timestamp saying, hey, we need to get this executed within X amount of time. These are all checkboxes for additional documents that we may have included on the purchase agreement. And we are now at the last page where all the signing takes place. There's a checkbox here. For some reason, this doesn't get accepted. It comes back and we have to do a counter offer. Then we got to send that back. And then finally, this is where we get all of our signatures done. Thanks so much for checking out today's video. If you got any benefit from it, please take a minute and like and subscribe. If you're looking to transact, reach out to me and we can set up a time to talk. Thank you.